So my question is this: if Bitcoin continues to grow in value, and the context of this question is I discovered this thing called Bitcoin faucets. It doesn't exist anymore, but it used to exist, and the principle was just to give people Bitcoins to create usage. And if Bitcoin were to increase in value, is there a point where it becomes so valuable that it actually discourages adoption? And if that's the case, is there still validity in giving away some portion of Bitcoin in order to people who don't have any, in order to increase usage?
Well, I think that we're dealing with that issue right now. I mean, I think we're dealing with the whole HODL situation. How many of you are HODLers? Almost all of you. How many of you have no idea what the word HODL means? Excellent. Basically, it just means holding Bitcoin. Typo from the old days. But yeah, I think we're dealing with that right now. But I personally still try to give people Bitcoin whenever I can, and the reason is because I think that this technology, you really only understand it if you experience it. And so to say, like, to sit here and explain, okay, what is Bitcoin and why is it so awesome? I mean, you kind of get it, but when I'm standing next to you and all of a sudden I push send, and in 3 seconds your phone lights up and says, ding, you have Bitcoin, there's no substitute for that. And so, you know, for me personally, I don't really care what the price is. I'm not a multi-millionaire. But, you know, I'm still going to give a tiny bit of Bitcoin to people that I meet because I think it's that important that they experience it.
And following on that point, some of the adoption, some people will adopt the Bitcoin blockchain protocol through secondary layer applications and solutions and won't do it directly through owning or holding Bitcoin themselves. And so perhaps as the industry matures, we see more adoption through those mechanisms.
Yeah, I think part of the issue is that perhaps you're thinking about mainstream adoption in countries where people have an abundance of choice. And I think it's much more interesting to think about adoption in countries where it is purely a matter of survival and there are very few other choices or any choices that actually can work. So imagine environments in which there is strong censorship or currency controls or government crackdowns or things like that. And then it's not just a matter of, oh, is this a convenient currency for me, or can I buy a cup of coffee with it? Who takes Bitcoin for hot chocolate? It's, can I protect my children from losing everything? And in that case, none of that matters. All of that goes out the window. And by the way, I would disagree with the idea that Bitcoin faucets are gone. I believe, as Pamela said, we are Bitcoin faucets. I've been leaking for 5 years. And I think like many people who have been in Bitcoin, it's best not to think about it, because if you do the math and you think about it, and I have done the math and it's horrifying to me. I used to give out $1 to $2 worth of Bitcoin when Bitcoin was $1 to $2. And that means hundreds and hundreds of Bitcoin, you know, 2 orders of magnitude more Bitcoin than I've ever managed to keep hold of. So I'm a terrible hodler, and I'm a very leaky faucet. I'll probably give another, you know, $50 worth of Bitcoin today, and then 10 years from now, I'll be like, oh, that was a Lambo. The last thing I'd actually do with my Bitcoin is buy a Lambo, by the way. I think that's the most asinine thing to do. Anyway, thank you.
My name is Ray. I'm very much a newbie to the cryptocurrency world. And as an investor in the traditional US dollars world, what I'm wondering about is the variables that would make cryptocurrencies be successful going forward. How might those same variables affect traditional pricing of precious metals during that transition? I understand this is highly hypothetical and you may not have considered this before. That is okay.
I think I'm going to take this one. I used to work at a precious metals brokerage firm, and I don't really think the industries have a lot of overlap. I don't really know that the price of Bitcoin has any effect on the price of precious metals. It's very different types of markets, and there was a lot of interest though in Bitcoin from that side of things. But yeah, I mean, as far as kind of predicting how they'll interact, I think there's too much separation. You have very different people who are interested in Bitcoin versus precious metals, and yeah, that would be kind of my perspective on it.
Don't know.
I mean, it's hard, and who does know? It's hard to know. I mean, I kind of left that industry because I thought Bitcoin was a lot more exciting, and that's what I hear from a lot more people kind of, I would say, around my age or so. But there's a lot of interest from the precious metal side. There's still a lot more skepticism to kind of overcome. And I think that's fair. Andres was mentioning earlier that most people who come to Bitcoin started as skeptics, and that was definitely true for me. I was like, oh, this is like magical internet money, like this doesn't mean anything, it's not backed by anything. But then you realize, yeah, all value is subjective, it's just anything can be money, so.
Yeah. I think part of the issue here is that if you look at it objectively and you have two things that can serve as currency, you know, gold and digital gold, and those are more or less substitute goods, and you could move between them, right, as money vehicles, as either store value, medium of exchange, or units of account systems, then yes, you would think that the greater adoption of cryptocurrency would eventually start affecting precious metals, because if gold is good, then digital gold is all the good things plus digital, so why not? That assumes the rational market hypothesis, which I believe is a load of horseshit. When it comes to precious metal aficionados or cryptocurrency aficionados, rationality has very little to do with our fervent beliefs and commitment to these movements that we're part of. And so the intensity of feeling that you see from the real aficionados of precious metals, for example, the gold bugs, as people would call them derisively, they're like 1,600 years of changes in currency and I'm still on yellow, right? No matter what happens. They've already rejected paper money, silver certificates, plastic, IOUs, and everything else that's come since. So this is just one more thing to reject. And at the same time, with cryptocurrency people, there is a certain level of indoctrination, if you like. So I don't believe those two markets really affect each other so much, because the people who are in them are so entrenched in their beliefs that they'll be unlikely to be phased if they haven't already been phased.
Hi guys, thank you for working the Meetup again. My question, any one of you, I believe it's inevitable that sooner or later a nation state will come out with their own cryptocurrency. Do you think that such cryptocurrency can possibly fit into the ethos of Nakamoto's vision, or will it just be a vehicle of maintaining state control over value of the state? And if you think it can in some way fit into the vision of your share, what would be the attributes of a system?
Can I ask you a question first before we answer? With what you just described, as you just described, would that system be decentralized?
That's a question for you. I would not accept one that is not.
Okay. Doesn't sound decentralized to me. I'm going to so Andreas has answered this question, I think, probably a couple dozen times. So I'll give him the mic again to do it once more.
Oh, sure, okay. The nation state is incapable of creating systems that completely undermine its own power. Structurally incapable of doing that. And therefore, I think a system created by a centralized entity will be centralized. It will be controlled, it will be closed, it will be censored, it will be jurisdictionally bound, it will be non-neutral, it will be non-open, it will be non-borderless. It has to be all of those things, otherwise, why create it? If you want the other things, why not just, I don't know, let people choose to use what they want? So I think we will, I agree with you, we will see nation states over the next few years, probably soon, maybe even this year, issue digital currencies that are centrally controlled, centrally managed, centrally issued, censorship heavy, control heavy, surveillance heavy, closed ecosystems that will be better than the systems they have, probably not as secure, probably less secure, kind of like how electronic voting is not as secure as paper voting, right? But it will be seen as progress. So, and they will be more efficient in some ways, you know, efficient surveillance, efficient totalitarianism, efficient fascism. But they cannot be the things that we care about because their very nature is against that. So then the question is, are they the real thing? They have the full faith and credit, whatever that's worth, of state X. Does that make them more real than the choice you make to follow the consensus Nakamoto chain of Bitcoin, for example? Does it make them more real than Dogecoin? And so the argument then becomes, can you still build a system of appeal to authority in a world that has largely been supplanted, where appeal to authority is no longer relevant, it's an obsolete concept? I think people will try to recreate the past. And these, by the way, these nation-state cryptocurrencies will exceed the market cap of Bitcoin. And the first headline you're going to see is, Bitcoin is dead. Of course, it always starts that way. Because the e-ruble, or the e-yen, or the e-euro is now bigger, is now better. Yeah, of course nation-states can make things that are bigger and have more value, or more market cap, or more money in them. Guess what? Banks can do that too. They don't have any creativity, any innovation, any principles, but they have money, lots of money, so they're going to build systems, and those systems will have a greater market cap than all of the cryptocurrencies. Does that make them real for you? That's the real question you should ask. And to me, the answer is very clear. If it's not neutral, borderless, censorship resistant, open to anyone, then it's not worth my attention. And other people will give it attention. I won't. That's a personal choice, always.
I'm really looking forward to DMV coin.
DMV coin. Your call is very important to us.
Hi, Andreas. I'd like to thank you. I got into Bitcoin seeing you on the Joe Rogan podcast.
Oh, thank you.
That's what got me into it. My name is Daniel Smith. I'm a developer at Digital Mint. And as a software developer, something that gets talked about, especially in the US, is the technical skills gap. We have so many X amount of software jobs, but only X amount of developers. And we talk about this constantly as a problem. And there's initiatives, like Black Girls Code, to bring more people into the development space, but yet it's not enough. And as a developer in this space, I see that there's almost a technical gap with, blockchain, because no matter how many times I read Mastering Bitcoin, you lose me at chapter 4 when you start talking about the curve of cryptography. You know what I mean? And so I wonder, how maybe do you guys think, this is for the whole panel, how do you think as a community we can not just address the technical skills gap of developers, but also people that truly understand blockchain and cryptography and Bitcoin to the degree that maybe you guys do?
Okay, so I'll start. Most of us on the panel have actually worked to do exactly what you're suggesting. What I've done specifically myself is that I have a program called City Fellows Consortium that is kind of like my side gig that's for exceptional engineers at the undergraduate level. They're not seeing any exposure to cryptocurrency or blockchain technology on campus. And so we're doing that off campus at City Fellows. And now City Fellows is only in Singapore and Los Angeles, but these types of engineers, the undergraduates, are going into Facebook and Google internships over the summer and talking to their friends as well. And so although it's a slower catalyst here, by getting folks at the age range at between 18 and 22, where truly talented engineers are really thinking about how their work and professional path can impact the world and change culture for the better is absolutely critical. And so that's how I'm taking the angle to focus on it.
So on November 5th, I'm actually giving a legal workshop, a 3-hour legal workshop to law students at Michigan State University Law School. They have an amazing program there that actually teaches law students how to use big data and code in Python. So they're trying to build lawyer coders in that program. And I know, right? There are quite a few other programs that are out there. So, as Alyse mentioned, I know all of us on the panel are working to kind of bridge that gap in small steps. I think that another really important thing to think about is Creative Commons and opening up these educational platforms to everyone and trying to move past the copyright. I'm going to assume that Andreas is not going to mention this, so I'll tell you all in case you don't know. But I believe he had the first technical book from O'Reilly that was actually
Second.
First and second?
No, it was the second.
Second book that was made available through Creative Commons. So you can actually read about mastering Bitcoin, and you can read the entire book on GitHub for free if you're a developer. So I think that should definitely be applauded.
You've basically just described my entire mission and focus. That's what I'm focused on the most, not just in terms of technical skills and developers, but just broader, like, how do we educate the next 100 million people who are going to enter this space, including 100,000 developers? And one of the things that's hardening for me is that every now and then I make a prediction, and half the time they're wrong, so it's just like flipping a coin. But every now and then one of these predictions comes true in ways that even surprise me. And one of the predictions I made came true recently. I met this person in Singapore who came to one of a meetup like this, a talk like this, and said to me, hi, I'm a developer, and I've been in blockchain now for a year, and a few weeks ago I discovered Bitcoin, and I'm very excited. I was like, what? How can you be in blockchain for a year and discover Bitcoin in the last 2 weeks? And he said, well, I went to this seminar by Bank of America, and they did blockchain, and they didn't mention Bitcoin at all. And then I got involved in distributed ledger technology and Hyperledger, and I mean, it's cool. But then I found all of these open source projects, and I went looking on GitHub, and I started reading about Bitcoin, and then I realized that's what started the blockchain thing. And now I'm interested in Bitcoin. So the prediction I had made was that all of these sycophants and money men who develop these closed blockchain distributed ledger bullshit databases, what they're going to inadvertently do is train up an army of developers who are going to have to put on a suit every day, pee in a cup, go to a sterile open office environment under fluorescent lights, work 80 hours for shit wages for people they despise. And one day they're going to discover a community of interesting people with weird clothes and hair colors. And then they're going to go, well, why am I doing this? They're going to take their Christmas bonus and they're going to start a Bitcoin company. And this is going to happen again and again and again and again. So they'll train them. We'll take them.
I just wanted to ask everyone, beyond hardware wallets and paper wallets, what's your favorite way to do truly like cold storage? And specifically, if I'm using day-to-day stuff, I might change wallets all the time. So, in terms of trust and everything, cold storage, which might be 90% of our assets, what's the best way to actually do truly cold storage?
I'm going to give you a lawyer answer, which is it really depends. It depends on you. This is one of the challenges in this industry is that people really want me to say like, okay, all you have to do is A, B, and C. And the problem is that A, B, and C might not actually work for you. So the question is, what are your technical skills? What, how secure is your home environment, right? Who else lives with you? Do you have a brother or a sister in the house or a small child? Like there are a lot of different questions that you have to ask yourself when you're trying to develop a security system for yourself. So I don't have a blanket answer for you. I will say that I agree with Andreas, as he mentioned earlier, that paper is your friend, and data stored electronically, maybe not so much, so I'm a big fan of that. When you're storing any sorts of seed, you want to make sure that you protect it from fire damage, from water, and from prying eyes. So I actually have an evidence bag with me, a cache holding bag that I can show you later. But one of the ways that I store my seeds is I put it in an opaque numbered bag. And that way I know that even if someone finds the bag, I'll know if they actually opened it up. These are simple things that you can do. Cache bags are available on Amazon.com for like $20. It's really not cost prohibitive, and there are a lot of little tiny things that you can do to store your seeds more securely.
In some cases, technology is not your friend. In some cases, or rather, modern technology is not your friend. You want something durable, you want something that will last, not last years, not last decades, last centuries. You want something like that. You don't want digital. You want good old analog, graphite scratchings on pressed papyrus fiber, right? Paper, acid-free paper, probably laminated, and if you write on that, simply with a pencil. And then you can use the magical machine learning optical character recognition thing that lives up here, and even if it's smudged and faded, you can still read it. That's foolproof. It will last centuries, not just decades. Your average CD-ROM or USB flash drive will barely last a year if you're lucky. And you never know what it might be exposed to, like electromagnetism, power surge, and even if it's in a vault or something, there might be a power surge in a building or a lightning strike, and you get there and it's toast, basically. Paper. Paper in multiple locations. So my cold storage works like that. It's not on devices, it's on paper. In multiple locations. And I use a second factor, which means I use a BIP39 passphrase in addition to the mnemonic, which is memorized and not written down. Some other people know it just in case, estate planning stuff. Very, very simple stuff is sometimes a lot better than the elaborate technology. It's really important, and this is one of the first rules you learn if you're involved in cryptography, is do not try to invent your own scheme, right? And programmers fall for this every time. It's so common. And the standards-based, fully tested, properly balanced, peer-reviewed methods are the ones that are durable for long periods of time. So don't say, oh, well, I'm going to use BIP39, but then I'll take 6 of the words and put them in a book where I circle every second word that corresponds to the third letter of the first word of the seed, and then I'll take the other 6 words and I'll stamp them into metal and bury them in the backyard, but I'll put the GPS coordinates to the stash and you lose your money, right? And what you need to do is radically simplify, adopt the standards that exist, use them as prescribed because they are properly balanced risk versus reward. They are properly calibrated for reliability and resilience, and just follow the standards. Don't try to get fancy with this stuff because you're far more likely to lose money than to have it stolen. So traditional techniques, ancient tools, standards.
I kind of want to play devil's advocate just to get your response. I don't necessarily agree with these, but what would you say to the people that are claiming Bitcoin is no longer Bitcoin? Bitcoin is no longer following the white paper. Bitcoin is no longer cheap. Bitcoin is no longer
decentralized. I just kind of want to get your response related to the topic.
So I think this goes back to what I was talking about earlier, which is this idea of objective truth. What is the real Bitcoin? And I think you have to understand or accept, or maybe you don't, but I do, that this is an evolving system, that it will not remain static, that it will have different challenges over its lifetime and its maturity, and it has to evolve in order to meet those challenges. The other thing I think that is dangerous in this space is to try to build a doctrine or some kind of hagiography, so some saints, you know, some original words. And so people appeal to the doctrine of Saint Satoshi of Nakamoto, and they read his words and chant them out. A digital electronic cash system. Like, we're going to get to that ridiculous point of indoctrination where people repeat words without even thinking about what they mean, right? You know how, like, little kids do the Pledge of Allegiance, and they make up words that kind of rhyme with what they're hearing. They have, like, you think they're thinking about, oh, I'm pledging allegiance to a system of codified law in the US Constitution that protects our civil liberties. No, they're just going blah, 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 blah. And people repeat words. Satoshi was not a saint. His word is not gospel, her word, their word. It doesn't matter. It's what you make of it. There is no original doctrine. There's a system that worked at that time for that use, and it worked until we had to scale it, and then we had to make it work in a different way. And what we have today won't last, because it will not survive change and evolution and growth. Every system has to adapt to that. Now, you may not like the direction it's going. If you don't like the direction it's going, then you can choose to do something different. And that's okay too, and it's not treason to the cause and heresy, etc. So I think a lot of that is really drama. There is no way to say that a system that is subject to market forces and human behavior, that it should maintain an original vision or design without change. I don't believe in original interpretation of anything, not the US Constitution, not the Satoshi white paper, and not the C++ code that came out of that. I think we are going to have to accept evolution of these systems, and if you don't like the direction it's going, one of the beauties of this system is that you can take the original model, the recipe, as it was constructed, and build a new thing that follows your approach, and if everybody wants to do that, they'll do that. We're not going to have to pick one winner, right? So it doesn't really matter what the original vision was or whether it still works today. Anybody else want to take that one?
So I'll add to that to say that I think it's important when evaluating arguments on either side, and for instance, the arguments that you read off of a list, to understand, to evaluate them critically, and to understand the perspective and the incentives of the person putting the argument forward. And then I agree with Andreas on needing to stay dynamic and to evolve for current conditions and changes. I think that in doing that, it's also important to have a relationship back to the core principles or value of the technology, and to have if there's a commitment, to have a commitment to that, the morality of the original technology, and then to be dynamic in response to changes so as to remain consistent with that.
Hi, I think I'm pretty new in this field, but I'm fascinated by the concept of the new technology in this field. And I just got two follow-up questions. One for Andreas, and you just said, you answered a question about the supply chain. You mean the technology cannot solve every part of that, but looks like in the smart contract, Ethereum also have to have a part of triggering that you have to trigger some contract from the reality world. So does that mean, so your conclusion of supply chain cannot be solved by blockchain can that imply that actually smart contract cannot solve every part? and the smart contract cannot achieve what they promised, like doing things automatically and without paper. The second one is just how you think about the dynamics of the current Bitcoin. Maybe I'm a little bit overstretching about the dynamics. I mean, you can see in the beginning the Bitcoin is pretty decentralized, but with more and more, with time going on, more overhead investment have to put into it to mine the Bitcoin. Even at one moment, the Bitcoin network have a potential 51% attack, and they have to break down the mining pool. So in that case, maybe in the future, the government can have the power to mine the Bitcoin, and then eventually every decentralized systems end up being centralized systems. So I'm just thinking about that. How can we reconcile this contradiction?
Just to clarify the question, are you asking if these systems, basically if governments can start mining Bitcoin to enact a 51% attack on the network and then it would become centralized? Is that the question you're asking?
Yes, I'm just asking, I just gave an example of how these systems can run in dynamic that starting from the decentralized and then end up centralized. So
because they have to engage with centralized systems.
Because centralized systems have an incentive to put into power, to invest into it, because it becomes so big and so valuable, and any centralized system have power to investment into it, and then it becomes it became centralized.
So to your first question, in terms of smart contracts and interacting with the world, this is not an unknown problem, and in fact, many people who are very active and much smarter than me in the Ethereum space have written extensively about this. If you want to read more about this, this is the idea of an oracle. And an oracle is an external service that certifies truth in certain domains. So let's say, for example, you have a smart contract that's triggered by the appearance of frost that can destroy crops, and you want to use that for an insurance contract. So you need an oracle to feed you the temperatures that occur in a specific region to see if that smart contract needs to be activated, for example. And in general, to really get the full promise of smart contracts, you really need to have ways of gauging truth about external events in these oracles. There are lots of companies working on finding ways to create decentralized systems that support oracle services, not within necessarily the blockchain, or using a blockchain or the Ethereum blockchain. So this is something that people are actively working on. Unless you have a way to decentralize the problem, if you have a centralized oracle, then that oracle, again, undermines the entire principle of a decentralized blockchain and smart contract platform. This is not an easy problem to solve. That doesn't mean that you can't do smart contracts. It just means that you have to be realistic about what problems you can solve today with smart contracts, and be optimistic about what problems you might be able to solve in the future with smart contracts. I don't think it invalidates the promise. I think it just simply means that this is a hard problem to solve, but it is very much worth solving. So how do we do that? How do you collect enough information from enough sources to arrive at common truth? Blockchain has shown us one way of doing this. Can we apply that to oracles? I don't know yet. Lots of smart people are working on it. But you have identified a key problem with reconciling things that are extrinsic or external to a blockchain with actions that are internal to the blockchain without creating a single point of failure, counterparty risk, or third-party trust that can be exploited. Now, in terms of Bitcoin's path, I think people say, oh, today mining is much more centralized than it used to be. Actually, I disagree. I think mining today is more decentralized than it was perhaps ever before. Some of the manufacturing of chips is very centralized, but I'm hoping that's going to change as we hit the Moore's Law limits of 12 nanometer fabrication and 16 nanometer fabrication and moving down. That slows down the entire process of ASIC manufacturing, which allows new entrants to play in that space. It's no longer as hard to get into manufacturing. What I would really like to see is companies like NVIDIA and AMD are beginning to recognize the potential of mining equipment and the ability to fabricate chips to do mining. Certainly in the GPU side, but just like they find that self-driving cars are a great way to sell NVIDIA GPUs, they're also finding that you can't buy a GPU in many markets nowadays because the Ethereum miners bought them all. So I'm hoping these companies enter the industry, but don't forget, there used to be one miner, Satoshi, and then there were two, and then there were three, and today there's hundreds. So we're not actually regressing in terms of centralization of mining as much as people would think. And I'm still hopeful that this system will be self-correcting, but if it does indeed get centralized and captured, then we'll disrupt it all over again. If a government wants to go and spend $100 billion on trying to capture a market of $100 billion and disrupting it to do a 51% attack, imagine how surprised they are if 3 days after they start the attack, we change the proof of work algorithm. Oops, that's $100 billion down the drain. So this is not a system that will simply take an attack and not resist it and not fight back. This is a dynamic system that evolves, and it evolves in the way that an immunity system, your own body's immune system, evolves. It's exposure to attacks that make it stronger, and this system has been under attack, is being attacked today, and we're going to gradually discover what attacks it can survive and what attacks it has difficulty surviving and what changes need to be made. And some of those changes can be made to Bitcoin or other blockchains today to protect it against future attacks. And if we find an attack that we can't defend against, maybe we have to start all over again. But we now have a recipe, so we can.
This is a follow-up on the first question we had. You guys were talking about holding coins. So kind of diminishes the Bitcoin as a currency. We look at it as a store of value, right? So how far do you think we are from having, and why are we far from having inception of the concept of demurrage, which would increase the velocity of the currency, and whether the problem is scalability right now, or do you think people are just kind of getting used to looking at cryptocurrencies as a store of value instead of what they are in their name, currencies? Thanks.
I can take a stab at that. We had a demurrage coin in 2013 called Frycoin. It wasn't very successful. I don't think demurrage is the solution. I think what happens is that the use cases for currency, which are store of value, medium of exchange, units of account, are progressive in nature, meaning that you can implement store of value even at very high volatility as long as you have long-term appreciation and adoption. And that's why that's the first application that we see these cryptocurrencies do. Right now, Bitcoin isn't very good as a medium of exchange. Now, does that mean it will never be good as a medium of exchange? I don't believe so. I believe that we see the volatility highly correlated to the overall volume and liquidity. The more this gets bigger, the more liquidity you have, the more volume of transactions you have, the more velocity you have, the lower the volatility of the system. And as the volatility goes lower and lower and lower, it brings more people who can use it as a medium of exchange. At first, it's only the people who don't have another choice, right? And then it's people who have other choices, which are terrible. And then it's people who have other choices that are okay, but this is slightly better. And then gradually it fits more and more. And unit of account is the last achievement. So when you get unit of account, achievement unlocked, that's it. Like, that's when Bitcoin has really arrived. It's when you say, how much is a Bitcoin worth? And the answer is, what do you mean? it's 1,000 millibits. I don't know, is this a trick question or something? It's worth a Bitcoin. Where have you been? So that's when you start using it as unit of account, but that can only happen when volatility is very, very low. So you can do long-term pricing. So these are simply progressions. This is just a matter of maturity. We will get all three. And therefore, I don't think it's a problem. I just think it's a natural evolution of the system.
I just wanted to add one quick thing. I think that we also have to look at real-world use cases. And one of the ones that I wanted to bring to your attention is something called GiveTrack. How many of you in this room are familiar with GiveTrack? Okay, great. So not very many. GiveTrack is a project by the BitGive Foundation, to which I'm an advisor and Alyse is a board member. And they just unveiled this really awesome new project at Money 2020 last week. The concept is to use the transparency of the Bitcoin blockchain to move charitable donations across borders. The problem is, what, did I hear a whoa? Yeah. Yes, okay, I feel the same way. You know, one of the big problems in charitable donations is that as money transfers across borders, it disappears. And so GiveTrack is trying to solve this problem. How this relates to your question is that if you have an option to use fiat currency for charity, or you have an option to use Bitcoin, and then you can track that Bitcoin all the way through the supply chain down to that water well in Kenya, now you have a reason to use it. Now you have a real world use case. I will say secretly that my goal is not to just have all charitable giving on this platform, but ultimately if we can prove that this is a viable system and that people actually want to be able to track, you know, money in real time for organizations, maybe we'll get local governments to adopt this sort of thing too, and we'll get to see where our tax dollars go in real time. And that's a game changer, that's a life changer. And yeah, that's why I wanted you to know about the project.
Hallelujah.
Yeah, so I guess I would add that I do transact in Bitcoin, so I want to push back just a little bit, perhaps on something implied. I think today, even with the friction that exists, it's a much better platform to transact on and much more reliable than traditional banking system, which I also use probably more frequently to transact. And that I think that we see the velocity in second layer solutions and in the innovation that comes around atomic swap that Andreas talked about before. I think the problem is now, frankly, I only pay for things in Bitcoin when I must, right? Because I don't want to let go of Bitcoin. And USD is not appreciating, is it? Okay. So if I have to choose between how to pay, I'll give away the currency that's weaker. But if I want to efficiently transact, I'll use Bitcoin.
And if you're interested in the economic theory behind it, what Alyse just described is known as Gresham's law, which is the idea that if you have two currencies and one of them is shit, you spend the one that's shit. So this was observed in the Middle Ages when you had counterfeit coins and things like that. So what happens in an environment where you have, for example, a currency that's failing due to hyperinflation, and you have a currency that's good, like the good money? We saw this happen in India recently, which was one of the really perfect examples of Gresham's law in action, visible to everyone. They said, okay, these 500 and 1,000 rupee notes are no longer legal tender, and these ones are the good ones. So if you have the good ones, what do you do with them? Do you spend them? Hell no, you put them under your mattress and you hold on to them and you try to get rid of the other ones. So suddenly, the only money that's circulating in the economy is the one that was just made illegal to circulate in the economy, and all of the other money disappears from the market instantly. Gresham's law played out in India exactly like that. So part of the problem, part of the reason we hold is because we're all influenced by this idea that we stack rank our assets and we get rid of the least useful, least valuable, least fungible, least liquid first, and hold the rest. And we do this on a grander scale. It's not just cryptocurrencies. You do that when you think about investments like real estate, cars, commodities, things you have, you know. But one of the things that works against that is this idea that over time we will start seeing applications that can only happen with cryptocurrencies, things that cannot be done with fiat, and that flips the equation completely, what Alyse talked about. Like today, for example, if I want to do an international wire transfer in order to get paid for going to a conference, Bitcoin. There's no question in my mind. In fact, I charge 20% more if you try to pay me in fiat, which is my I have to call a banker to find out where the hell the wire transfer went fee. That's the colloquial name. The don't make me call a banker fee. Now that simple choice that I make to transact with Bitcoin, because in the very narrow circumstances of a cross-border transaction, it's simply better. What if that use case broadens? What if we start doing micropayments? I can do micropayments on Lightning Network or some other second layer technology or some other cryptocurrency or blockchain. Once you start doing micropayments, well then it's not a matter of do I choose between the two. I can't do micropayments with traditional banking. I can't do it with a credit card. And if that's what's stopping me from getting the very latest, awesomest single by Justin Bieber, I'm going to be like, well, I'm into cryptocurrencies now, right? And some people are going to make that choice. So what will change the HODL mentality is the emergence of applications that can only be done with cryptocurrency. And I think that's a big game changer. We're not seeing it yet. We're very far from it.
All right, thanks everyone for your questions. Give it up again to these rock stars of Bitcoin.